Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to tackle a really tough question, one that might hit a little close to home for some of us. Why do we get stuck in patterns of our own making, in our own pain? So let's kick things off with this quote right here. It's a really powerful idea, right? It kind of flips our whole understanding of the brain on its head. See, we think our brains are wired for happiness, but what if they're not? What if they're just survival machines? And what they really, really crave is certainty. That familiar pain? Well, it might be hell, but at least it's a hell we know. And that really is the big question for today, isn't it? Why are we drawn to our own suffering? We're going to unpack this thing from a bunch of different angles: psychology, neurobiology, and you know what? Even some ancient philosophy. We're going to see how this all connects. All right, so let's get right into it. This idea might sound kind of crazy at first, but stick with me. Are we actually addicted to our own suffering? It's this notion that we don't just put up with our pain, but on some deep subconscious level, we might actually be recreating it. And believe it or not, this comes down to basic biology. You see, our brains are hardwired for one thing above all else: survival, not happiness. And so the certainty of a familiar pain, that predictable pattern of trauma, can actually feel safer to that primal part of our brain than the scary, wide open uncertainty of joy. Wild, right? And this cycle has a name. It's called the trauma loop. Some psychologists also call it repetition compulsion. It's this unconscious drive we have to reenact these painful events from our past. We find ourselves in the same situations, with the same kinds of people, feeling the same damn way. And we often have no idea that we're the ones setting the whole thing up. And this isn't some abstract theory, right? This stuff shows up in our real lives all the time. Like, you might find yourself always dating people who are emotionally unavailable because that coldness, it feels familiar. It feels like home. Or maybe you sabotage a huge career opportunity because, honestly, the thought of success is way more terrifying than the comfortable, familiar feeling of failure. It's a really strange, self-destructive dance we do. Okay, so where does a cycle like this even start? Well, it all begins in the mind. It starts with the stories we tell ourselves, the beliefs we hold about who we are and how the world works. These loops, they're built on these really rigid, extreme beliefs. Psychologists have a term for them: maladaptive beliefs. And the tricky part is, they become self-confirming. Think about it. The belief makes you act a certain way, and that action then creates a result that seems to prove the original belief was true all along. It's a perfect, vicious circle. And these beliefs, they're like the engine for so many different struggles. Take depression, for example. If your core belief is "I'm worthless," you're going to filter everything that happens to you through that lens. You'll ignore the good stuff and zoom in on any little thing that confirms your worthlessness. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy powered by your own mind. This mental habit, this obsessive replaying of negative thoughts, has a name. It's called rumination, and it's a huge part of what keeps people stuck. It's not just thinking about a problem to solve it. No, it's more like a mental hamster wheel. You're just running in circles, replaying the same painful scenarios over and over. And all it does is dig those negative grooves in your brain even deeper. All right, now this is where things get really fascinating. Because this cycle of negative thoughts, it's not just in your head. It's not just an abstract idea. It is physically changing the structure of your brain. Yeah, you heard that right. Neurobiology is showing us that being addicted to suffering isn't just some catchy phrase. It's literal. The brain pathways that light up, the chemical changes that happen, they're incredibly similar to what happens in the brain of someone with a substance addiction. Your brain can literally get hooked on the chemical cocktail of its own stress and negativity. So take a look at this. This shows us the actual addiction cycle that scientists have mapped out in the brain. They've broken it down into these 3 repeating stages, and these stages are the engine that drives all compulsive behavior, whether you're talking about a drug or a destructive thought pattern. Okay, so here's how it works. First, you've got the binge. This is that rush of familiar negative feeling. Maybe it's a burst of anger or self-pity. And weirdly enough, it can actually trigger the reward centers in your brain. But then comes stage 2, the withdrawal. This is the crash. You feel awful, anxious, stressed. And that feeling leads right into stage 3, preoccupation, where you're just consumed by this craving, a craving to go back and get that fix from the negative behavior. And boom, the whole cycle starts all over again. Okay, that all sounds pretty bleak, I know. But here is the most important part of this whole thing, the good news. While these patterns get hardwired into our brains, they are not permanent. The brain has this incredible ability to change and heal itself. This is not a life sentence. And check this out. This is actual proof. These brain scans are just mind-blowing. They're showing the density of dopamine transporters. That's a key part of our brain's reward system. On the left, you've got a healthy brain. In the middle, that's the brain of a meth user after just 1 month of being clean. You can see the damage, right? But look at the brain on the right. That's the same person after 14 months. Look at that recovery. This is solid visual evidence that our brains can and do heal. Change is physically possible. So, this whole battle we have with our own minds, it's not a modern problem. Not at all. For literally thousands of years, ancient wisdom traditions have been wrestling with this exact same question of why we suffer. And two really powerful philosophies give us different lenses to look through. In Buddhism, you have the concept of dukkha, which is often translated as suffering. The idea here is that suffering is just a fundamental part of life, and our addiction to it comes from clinging to things that are always changing. Then you have the Danta, which talks about Maya, the idea that suffering is basically an illusion, a massive misperception of reality. From this view, our pain is a story we've told ourselves so many times that we've become addicted to believing it's real. And what's so cool about Buddhism is that it gives you a super practical roadmap. The Four Noble Truths are like a doctor's diagnosis and prescription. First, the diagnosis. Life involves suffering. Just accept it. Second, the cause. It comes from craving and attachment. Third, the prognosis. It's possible for the suffering to end. And finally, the prescription. Here's the path you can follow to actually end it. I love this quote from Swami Vivekananda because it just perfectly sums up that idea of Maya. Things are dead in themselves, and then we breathe life into them. Think about that. The job, the relationship, the money, they're all neutral. We're the ones who project all this meaning, all this drama, all this suffering onto them. We literally breathe our pain into the world. Okay, so if our minds create these loops and then our brains physically hardwire them into place, that leads us to the big million-dollar question. How in the world do we break free? Well, thankfully, we're not flying blind here. There are proven, well-established ways to recover. And the best approach is usually holistic. It often means combining things like medical support for the physical side, therapy to get at those deep-seated beliefs, and maybe most importantly, community support, so you don't have to do it all alone. And the toolkit we have to work with today is amazing. You've got things like cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, which is all about learning to challenge those negative thought patterns head-on. You've got peer support groups like 12-step programs, which are incredible for breaking that cycle of shame and isolation. And then you have practices like mindfulness and meditation, which are all about learning to just watch your thoughts come and go without getting swept away by the current. It's about finding the right tools for you. So here's the bottom line. Understanding all this, the psychology, the neuroscience, the philosophy, it does more than just explain why we're stuck. It doesn't just describe the prison. It hands us the map and the keys to get out. It gives us the power to see the story we've been telling ourselves and to finally decide that we're ready to write a new one.